Chosen one, something ended before you even arrived because people were too scared to tell them they were wrong about you, and now they feel exposed and humiliated by the wreckage of their own assumptions. A chapter someone else wrote using your reputation as a weapon has concluded, and the person who treated their lies like scripture is now feeling the full weight of a narrative that was never based on anything real. Your instinct wasn't anxiety, it was a functional, operational power that has now confirmed you are built differently, leaving those who plotted against you to face the public collapse of their own poisoned starting point. Here is where it truly begins. Pay close attention, because this is the part that reframes everything else. When this person looked at you, they saw abundance. They saw stability. They saw someone who is grounded in what they have, careful with what they carry, quietly and consistently building towards something significant. They saw someone who does not announce their wealth because they do not need to. They saw the kind of foundation that does not shake when the pressure rises. That image did something to them. It revealed the gap between where you are and where they are, the gap between what your choices have produced and what their choices have produced. And here is the brutal truth about people who cannot close a gap through their own discipline. They do not work harder. They do not look inward. They do not sit with the discomfort of self-examination. Instead, they look across the gap and ask a completely different question. Why does that person have what I want? And when pride is steering the question, the answer is never honest. Pride never says, because they made different sacrifices, or because they were more disciplined, or because they chose long-term stability over short-term relief. Pride says, because they took something from me, because they withheld what I was owed, because what they have should have come to me. So this person convinced themselves that your abundance was directly connected to their lack, that your stability was built on something that rightfully belonged to them. Maybe it was a financial resource. Maybe it was an inheritance or a material opportunity they had been quietly counting on. Whatever the specific thing was, they had already spent it in their mind. They had already factored it into a future they were constructing on a foundation that was never theirs to stand on. Then the moment arrived when they realized it was not coming, and that is when the seed cracked open. Here is what they never accounted for. The moment they made you their problem, they stopped addressing their actual problem, and their actual problem was never you. It was the accumulation of their own poor decisions, misplaced priorities, and repeated shortcuts that had landed them exactly where they were. Every hour they spent constructing a case against you was an hour they did not spend building anything real for themselves. Every conversation they had about what you were supposedly withholding was a conversation they did not have about what they were actively doing to sabotage their own stability. You were not their problem, you were their excuse. And the difference between a problem and an excuse is enormous, because problems can actually be solved. Excuses only get louder over time. Watch how fast a wrong assumption can become a war. It begins with one conversation. This person, someone you trusted, someone you considered a safe presence in your life, sits down with someone else and says, "I need to tell you what happened." And what follows is their version, not the truth, their version, filtered through the resentment of unmet expectations, sharpened by the bitterness of a plan that collapsed, and delivered with the full conviction of someone who has already reached a verdict without examining a single piece of evidence. The listener nods. Of course they do. This is someone they respect, someone whose certainty has always read as credibility. The first domino falls. Then comes another conversation, and another after that. The version of you they constructed gets repeated in quiet corners of gatherings you were not present to address. Each retelling makes it feel more settled, more factual, more real. This is precisely how lies gain mass, not through grand declarations, but through the slow and steady accumulation of an uncontested narrative. Nobody questions it, because nobody wants to be the one person who questions it. But here is what you need to hold on to. Every single person who heard that version of you and said nothing, Every person who felt something was off, who noticed the pieces did not quite fit, who sensed the account was incomplete, every one of them made a deliberate choice. They chose silence over truth. And that silence, which felt like self-preservation in the moment, is going to become the very thing that dismantles the entire structure from the inside. Remember that. It becomes important later. Before the collapse, though, you need to understand how deliberately this was built. This was not venting. This was not someone processing genuine hurt with a trusted friend. This was a coordinated effort to reshape your reputation in the minds of people who mattered to you. It was designed to build a version of you that would justify what was being planned next. The accusation was constructed before the charge was even formally made. The perception was poisoned before you had any opportunity to speak for yourself. And through all of it, you did not break. Here is what you were doing, while that false version of you was being circulated without your knowledge. You were working. You were showing up for your own life. You were being exactly who you have always been. And that consistency, that uninterrupted authenticity, meant the lie could spread through perception, but could never infect the source. The people closest to the real you carried the antidote without even knowing it existed. A lie that cannot reach its target eventually turns on the person spreading it. That is not a theory. That is exactly what happened here. If this message awakened something within you, hype this video for other chosen ones who need to hear this. Here is where it caught fire. When the campaign did not break you, when you did not hand over what was expected, or collapse under the weight of the accusations circulating about you, something shifted in this person. The objective changed. It stopped being about extracting something from you. It became about defeating you. And those are two entirely different creatures. A person trying to extract something from you will eventually exhaust their strategies and stop. A person trying to defeat you will keep escalating indefinitely, because defeating you is not a thing they can hold or measure. It is a feeling they are chasing, and that particular feeling is never finally satisfied. So the tactics went further, harder, beyond conversation and quiet social pressure into territory that had no legitimate justification. This person needed to be the dominant force. They needed to be the one everyone deferred to, the one whose word was final, the one who could not be refused or challenged. And in their framework, dominance is not built by elevating yourself. It is secured by making sure everyone around you is positioned lower. So the pressure intensified. The accusations sharpened. Another person got pulled into the situation, someone with a different kind of reach but the same kind of appetite. And together these two believed that combined force would eventually produce the compliance they were after. They calculated wrong. But here is the part they missed entirely. While they were coordinating against you, the very act of recruiting others was creating witnesses they never intended to create. The people pulled into the campaign were watching everything. Not just watching you, they were watching the person doing the recruiting. They were noticing the moments when the mask slipped. They were filing away the discrepancies between what was being claimed and what was actually being demonstrated. They were observing the gap between the righteousness being performed and the behavior actually present. Every person brought in to strengthen the campaign became a potential source of its undoing. This person handed their own exposure the keys without realizing they had done it. Look, you already know the attacks weren't random, and if you're paying attention you can feel it. Their walls are closing in. You've also noticed something else. A lot of Chosen One channels on YouTube have gone quiet, videos removed, voices pushed off the platform. The mainstream media is cracking down on us, but we will not give up our voice. So let's talk about what we're doing about it. That's why I built Destiny Engine. And when you join, you're not just supporting your favorite channels, you're also fueling your own rise. It's a 360 win. It generates personalized sequences that help you rewire betrayal into transcendence, turn isolation into sacred power, and transform their downfall into your rise. We are using the Dark Elite's own weapons against them, taking their declassified consciousness technology that programmed competition and scarcity and repurposing it to serve cooperative intelligence. The beauty is, you don't even have to lift a finger. You put on the headphones, press play, and your subconscious is rewired while your enemies collapse under the weight of their own lies. This is why I created it in the beginning, so everything they did to break you becomes fuel for your purpose. The collective upgrade is underway. Start your destiny engine for $7 today and watch divine justice accelerate in your life. Link in the description. This is the turn. This is the moment where the architecture of the entire campaign comes apart at its foundation. Driven by absolute certainty, this person decided to confirm what they already believed they knew. They went looking for evidence. They initiated what they were certain would be a straightforward exercise in validation, collecting the proof that would finally, definitively, undeniably establish that everything they had said about you was accurate. What they found was the opposite. The truth they uncovered did not confirm the version of you they had constructed and distributed so confidently. It contradicted it, not around the edges, at the very center. The original assumption, the single belief the entire campaign was built upon, was wrong. Completely, structurally, and foundationally wrong. They had been holding the wrong end of the stick with both hands, walking it into every conversation, repeating it with total confidence to everyone who would listen, and it was wrong. Now, sit with what that actually means, not just that they were mistaken, but what being mistaken means when you have already gone this far, when you have told this many people with this much certainty, when you have recruited allies, applied sustained pressure, and escalated into territory that cannot be walked back casually, when your entire moral justification for every move you made rested on something that turned out to have no foundation at all. The sensation that arrives in that moment is not humility. Humility requires a kind of openness this person does not possess. What arrives instead is shame, dense, burning, inescapable shame, the kind that replays the worst moments on a continuous loop, the kind that catalogues every single person who was told the false version and calculates, with excruciating precision, how each of those people is now going to reassess everything they were told. And because you were never in the wrong, because your hands were clean in this entire situation, you do not carry that shame. That weight belongs entirely to the one who created it. Consequences are very precise about finding the right address. The exposure that follows does not arrive all at once. It seeps. It moves through the same channels the lie used. The same people who absorbed the false version of you are now quietly, privately beginning to hear a different account. And the contrast between those two versions is doing its own work, steadily, without you having to lift a finger or say a single word. Remember the people who heard the false version of you and said nothing, the ones who felt something was off but chose not to be the person who challenged it. That silence is breaking now, not because those people suddenly found a courage they did not have before. The social calculation shifted. When the person who made silence feel necessary is the one now being exposed, the cost of speaking up drops dramatically. When the dominant force in a circle loses its grip, the people who were quietly suppressed beneath it start to breathe again. And when people start breathing freely, they start talking honestly. What they are saying is not directed at you. It is directed at each other. Quiet recalibrations, careful acknowledgements that things did not add up, private retellings of moments they witnessed that now look entirely different in hindsight. The fracture is happening from the inside, which is the only place it could have genuinely happened. You could not have engineered this outcome. You did not need to. The pressure that was applied against you had nowhere left to go once it stopped finding purchase, and it reversed back into the structure that originally generated it. Here is something important you need to understand about what is being revealed right now. This is not only about what was done to you specifically. What is surfacing reaches further than your situation. People who move the way this person moved do not reserve that behavior for a single target. There is always a pattern. There are always others who have experienced versions of the same treatment. And when one crack becomes publicly visible, the people who were quietly managing their own cracks begin to recognize the moment as permission to speak. The person who operated as though permanently immune to accountability has now been made accountable, and that visibility fundamentally changes what others around them feel permitted to name out loud. You did not orchestrate any of this. You did not need to. You simply refused to absorb the lie, and the lie had nowhere else to land except back on its source. You already knew. Before any external confirmation arrived, before anyone brought you proof, you already knew. The instinct you almost dismissed, the one that registered something wrong before anything was provable, was right. It was always right. And because you knew, because your discernment had already mapped the terrain before the evidence caught up to it, there is no version of an apology that can now arrive cleanly. There is no conversation this person can initiate that does not have to walk through the entire history of what was attempted against you. There is no casual re-entry into your trust, not because you are bitter, not because you are holding on to something, but because you already know exactly what happened, and they know you know. That knowing permanently changes the geometry of any future interaction between you. An apology built on pride is not actually an apology. It is a transaction. It is engineered to relieve the apologizer of discomfort rather than to genuinely reckon with the harm created. Any apology this person might bring, if they ever found the will to bring one, would be timed for their own convenience. It would be calibrated to make them feel resolved, rather than to meaningfully address what you were put through. You would recognize it instantly, and they know you would, which is precisely why it has not arrived. Pride does not apologize. Pride waits for a second chance that was already forfeited. What matters for you right now is this: release the expectation of acknowledgement. Release any residual hope that this person will eventually hand you the moment of recognition you deserved from the beginning. That moment is not coming in the form you might have once needed it. And here is the consequence of that. The moment this person chose to come against you with deliberate intent to harm someone they shared trust and history with, something shifted in what was available to them. The covering that had perhaps kept the full weight of their own consequences at a manageable distance began to withdraw, not as punishment handed down by some external authority, as the natural result of the direction they deliberately chose to move in. You do not maintain that kind of covering when you use your position to target someone whose hands are clean. That is simply how this works. Every escalation they made, every tactic they reached for, every overreach made in front of witnesses, each one drew down from an invisible account they had been relying on without consciously knowing it. And now they are standing in the bewilderment of a campaign that should have produced results by their own calculation and produced nothing except the systematic dismantling of their own credibility and standing. Here is the other thing their calculation missed. Every time they pushed harder and you did not react in kind, you were not being passive, you were letting them spend. Your restraint was not weakness, it was the most strategically powerful posture available to you. Each overreach they made in the presence of observers was a visible demonstration of who they actually are. Each moment you held your composure while pressure mounted was a visible demonstration of who you actually are. The contrast was always working in your favor, even on the days when it felt like nothing was moving in any direction at all. Let us be very clear about who you are in this. You were targeted, you were lied about. Your name was spoken incorrectly in spaces you were not present to address. All of that is true, and none of it makes you a victim. A victim is defined by what was done to them. You are defined by what you continued to do in spite of what was done to you. You kept building. In the middle of the campaign, in the middle of the pressure and the false narratives and the coordinated effort to shrink you, you kept working. You kept showing up for your own life. You kept moving with the quiet, relentless energy of someone who knows their destination and refuses to mistake disruption for redirection. That is not a soft quality. That is the most difficult quality there is to sustain. Most people, when the attack becomes this specific and this personal, either collapse inward or explode outward. Collapsing inward produces stagnation. Exploding outward hands the other person the ammunition they were trying to create. You did neither. You stayed in forward motion, and forward motion maintained under that kind of pressure is the most concrete demonstration of dominance available to a human being. Here is what that kind of sustained forward motion produces over time. It creates an asymmetry. While the campaign against you was burning through capital, social capital, relational trust, the credibility that makes people follow without question, you were quietly accumulating. You were adding to everything that actually compounds your reputation with the people who observe carefully, your clarity about who genuinely belongs in your world, your demonstrated track record of integrity under pressure. None of that accumulation is loud. All of it is undeniable once it is visible, and something real is now moving toward your life, something material and significant, something connected to the work you have been doing quietly and consistently while the noise of this campaign circulated around you. The people who observe from positions that actually matter have been watching you earn it, not through performance, through the demonstration of exactly the qualities required to be trusted with what is coming, the ability to stay grounded in your values when it would have been far easier to abandon them, the discipline to keep building when the building felt thankless, and the integrity to refuse the shortcut of retaliation even when retaliation felt fully justified. The qualities this person resented in you are precisely what selected you for what comes next. What they tried to weaponize against you is what the right people recognized as your most important credential. Nothing in this is accidental. Your rising and their unraveling are not two separate events. They are the same event experienced from two different positions. The same energy that was misdirected against you is now returning to its origin. As it returns, it clears the path in front of you. Every connection that was strained by the false version of you that circulated is now recalibrating toward the real version. Every person who absorbed the lie and is now absorbing the truth becomes a witness to the contrast between what was claimed and what is actually true about who you are. The alliance that formed against you is fracturing. Partnerships built on shared agendas do not survive the collapse of the agenda. Without the common project holding them together, what remains is the shared embarrassment of having been wrong together, and the uncomfortable awareness that each person in that alliance knows enough about the other's intentions to make any parting complicated. That fracture is not your concern to manage. It is consequence completing its circuit exactly as it should. Something else is also surfacing, and you may only catch the edge of it directly. What came to light through your situation reaches further than your situation alone. A pattern of behavior is now visible that was previously obscured by the performance of authority and confidence. The people who witnessed that pattern from the inside, who had their own quiet, unaddressed experiences of being on the receiving end of it, are recognizing this moment as a turning point. The person who operated as though permanently beyond accountability has now been held accountable, and that visibility changes what everyone around them feels permitted to say out loud. You did not design any of this. You did not need to design it. You simply refused to absorb the lie, and the lie had nowhere else to land. Do you remember where this began? One poisoned decision. One person looking at your life and deciding you owed them something they had no legitimate claim to. Every accusation, every escalation, every sleepless night, every act of manufacture entitlement, all of it grew from that single starting point. Here is what that seed actually produced. Not the harvest they imagined, not the outcome they constructed the entire campaign to achieve. It produced a mirror, and what the mirror reflects is everything this person refused to examine in themselves. The entitlement, the willingness to harm someone they claimed to care about in order to take what they wanted, the cowardice dressed up as righteousness, and the small and grasping vision disguised as a legitimate claim. The seed grew, but the fruit belongs entirely to the one who planted it. You never fed that seed. You never gave it anything to grow on. You lived with integrity in your own lane while it grew adjacent to your path, and then you stepped aside and let the harvest find the person responsible for the planting, because that is how it always works. What is sent out eventually returns to the hand that released it, and the specific thing they were pursuing, the resource, the financial advantage, the material opportunity they had already mentally claimed, it was never calibrated for them. It was never going to reach them regardless of how much force was applied. What belongs to you carries a signature that cannot be transferred through pressure, manipulation, or coordinated campaigns. What is meant to land in your life moves toward you the way water finds its level, naturally, without force and without requiring anyone's permission. No campaign could have redirected it. No amount of coordinated pressure could have rerouted what was already moving with your name on it. What is yours was always going to find you, and it is finding you now. We are back at the beginning, except you are not the same person who arrived there. Something ended before you got here. That was the first thing said in this monologue, and it was true. What ended was the false chapter, the one written about you by someone who had wrong information, wrong intentions, and the kind of certainty that only survives when it is never truly examined. That chapter is closed. It did not close because you fought it. It closed because it was constructed on nothing real, and nothing built on nothing real can hold indefinitely. Your chapter is the one that is opening. Here is what most people misunderstand about being chosen. The opposition you face is not an interruption of your path. It is not a detour you have to recover from before your real life resumes. The opposition is part of the process itself. It is the specific and precise pressure that produces the exact version of you required for what comes next. You cannot arrive at the next level carrying the same limitations that existed before. Something has to test those limitations. Something has to put genuine pressure on what you are made of before greater responsibility is placed in your hands. This situation tested everything you had: your patience, your integrity, your ability to remain grounded when the ground was being actively destabilized beneath you, your capacity to hold your composure when every instinct told you that you had every right to retaliate, your willingness to trust a process you could not fully see when the visible evidence around you was designed to make you doubt yourself. You passed, completely, not narrowly, not barely, not by the skin of your teeth, completely. What follows that kind of passing is not a certificate. It is not public recognition or a moment where everyone who doubted you lines up to acknowledge what happened. What follows is access. The next level opens. The door that was always present but required this specific, tested, clarified version of you to walk through it. That door is open now, and you are standing in front of it. You know that now. After everything, you know it not because someone handed the knowledge to you, but because you earned it under the most demanding conditions available. That kind of knowing does not leave. It does not fade when circumstances get difficult again. It is the bedrock version of self-knowledge, the kind you can build absolutely anything on. Now consider the full arc of what just unfolded. The poisoned seed in part 1 and the mirror it became. The calculated assumption that launched an entire campaign, and the truth that dismantled it from within. The silence of the people who knew something was wrong, and how that same silence eventually fractured the alliance it was protecting. The two coordinated people, and the fault lines now pulling them apart. The path that was always calibrated for you, running clean and undiverted through everything that was attempted against it. Nothing landed. Nothing redirected what was coming toward you. Not because you are untouchable as a human being, but because what was being targeted, the version of you built from entitlement and false assumptions, does not actually exist. You cannot successfully damage a fiction. Every move passed through the fabricated image and found nothing real behind it to hold on to. The real you kept moving the entire time. What is coming toward you now is moving toward this version of you, the version that walked through fire and came out knowing exactly what it carries, the version whose worth is no longer a question to be answered by external validation, because it was demonstrated in the hardest possible conditions, and the answer is now permanent. The person who set all of this in motion is somewhere right now, unable to sleep, watching the outcome refuse to resemble anything they planned, watching their credibility, the credibility they assumed was a permanent fixture of their identity, quietly drain out of every relationship that once reinforced it, watching the resources they believed they could intercept continue moving in the direction they were always going to move, and finding in the circle around them that no one is willing to reassure them that it will be fine, because even the people who were once their most reliable supporters can now see the mirror clearly, and what it shows them is not something easy to defend. Let that be their situation. It is not yours. Yours is just beginning. Chosen one do not just rise, they compound. Every test passed adds permanent depth to the foundation. Every fire survived expands the capacity to carry more. Every chapter that attempted to bury you and failed becomes irrefutable evidence of something that cannot now be argued away, that you cannot be stopped, that what belongs to you cannot be taken from you, and that the path laid for you moves through opposition without ever being broken by it. Everything was brought against you. Every person, every tactic, every angle, every piece of pressure believed to be leverage, and here you are, still standing, still building, still covered, still compounding. Walk forward like someone who knows exactly what they carry, because that is precisely who